Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet. It's Tuesday evening and as always we sit here, we discuss the facts and nothing but the facts. If it's not a fact, we don't discuss them. Tonight we are talking about a very important issue which has to do with the fight against COVID-19, the breakthrough which we have all been waiting for since 2020, that we started dealing with the disease COVID-19, the pandemic that brought the world on its knees. And that has to do with the vaccines that the world has been able to secure through the works of various big pharma. And tonight we're discussing the rollout plan. Government had earlier given indication by the month of March would have our first consignment of COVID-19 vaccines. We have been talking about AstraZeneca, and just this week we had the introduction of Sputnik V, which the government is bringing into the country for dealing with the COVID-19 disease. Many have been asking, what's the plan of government in terms of ensuring that people get the vaccine? Tonight, that's where our focus is, and we're discussing what it means to vaccinate, how the process is going to happen, and where we need to pay attention to when it comes to the vaccination exercise. If you read the front page of the Daily Graphic this morning, a very interesting story was there. COVID-19 vaccines safe, effective, FDA assures the public, and that's where our focus would be, because there are several conspiracy theories out there. There are several concerns that are being raised in terms of the safety of some of these drugs that we are going to be talking about. AstraZeneca, for instance, we're being told has the 86% efficacy rate. We're being told that of the Sputnik also has around the same range, around 91.6%. And so the safety bit is where our focus would be this evening. So tonight we're talking about COVID-19 and vaccination. How do you understand the word vaccination? I'll have my guests help me to discuss these issues thoroughly live on the show tonight. So I encourage you to stay with us. Tonight, the show is live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. And you can look for eTVGhana and join the conversation. We'll be right back, and I'll tell you much more about my guests. And you're welcome back. This is Fact Sheet live on eTV, live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I've already indicated our topic for discussion. We're talking about the fight against COVID-19 and the government's efforts at securing vaccines for the treatment of the disease. We are expecting some 2.4 million vaccines into the country. The FDA, per the statement that I just read to you a few minutes ago, has indicated that these drugs, the Sputnik V, which is coming from Russia, and that of the AstraZeneca, is safe to use on Ghanaians. But tonight, to help me with the discussion, Dr. Yao Bediako. He is an immunologist with WACCBIP, and Mr. John Frederick Dazi. He is the Department Program Manager, Pharmaceutical Association of Ghana. And I will seek their views on the issues we're talking about, these vaccines, and their use and their ability to cure the disease COVID-19. But before we set the conversation rolling, this morning on the Happy Morning Show, I had the privilege of speaking to some officials from the Ghana Health Service to explain to us the mode of the rollout of the vaccine. And we got an explanation, and I thought it would be important for us to sit with the conversation in proper context by listening to my interaction with Dr. Achianu this morning on the Happy Morning Show. The conversation is a mix of three, and so for our viewers, please bear with us even as we listen to that conversation before I go to the Zoom lines to speak to my guests who are with me to interrogate the issue. Dr. Achianu, good morning. Hello, good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
What are say?
Oh, Nyamiadum, and I'm on pipe.
About Happy Morning Show. So, Doc, I mean, no one shall say, I mean, Bisa said, now my colleague, I'm in the studio, Bisa said, I be on vaccines, and the infant said, well, wow, is it for life? And I say, it covers you for a year, it covers you for 2 years, for 6 months. Over to me, Pacho, am I in Chichimukakra?
Yo, Michia, a tea for Momunirachi. It's also vaccine way, a vaccine, Abafu. And it will be difficult to say, say, what follow up and go for who say, what the will be an answer, what the manner 2 years. Vaccine by a French, there's no follow-ups, no. Tend to be need a year or two. I think the earliest vaccine came in December. and we are just in February. So it will be difficult to say maybe 2 years until people are followed up for that length of time. Who said
I'm trying to follow you.
In December. The will be after or February. It's just 2 months. You can't tell say maybe 2 years and I said 3 years until you follow people up like that.
But I thought to say when for instance, platforms be to sell and set all these the manufacturing companies should be able to tell you say idea we say wow, it will take you this number of months, this number of years, and sana it will wear off. And
they can only guess and estimate and make what we call projections, but the actuals here, just people are followed up.
My sense of the estimates, the guesswork they've done, and what they've told you with respect to AstraZeneca and Sputnik V,
No, they haven't done that. They are still doing studies. Into all kind of literature now, it is clear. Say nobody knows how long the vaccines will last in terms of immunity.
But is that not dangerous? Say, for instance, if we don't know, and then you take the vaccine, and in 3 months, it wears off, and the person thinks, he say, yeah, what at the end of the year, 1 year, now he is covered for just 3 months. It means the person is exposed again.
No, the idea of vaccinating in epidemic, different from vaccinating a child or an adult in a routine. You see, when you have an epidemic, you want to break the transmission. Once you break the transmission, it will be a one. That's how it works. The point is that you need to give vaccines to a lot of people within a short time, or a reasonably short time. If you get you can't be a friend of what herd immunity. You can't be you need some minimum, critical minimum to be able to protect the rest of the population and break transmission. Once transmission is broken, it doesn't matter whether it lasts a year or two. Once transmission is broken, the epidemic is over. That's the idea.
All right. Now, I have heard countless times so one more herd immunity from some pieces I read online. I read it should take about 60% of the population to have the herd immunity. In that case, herd immunity 60%. Is it a matter of an instant vaccination, and answer is a matter of spread vaccination, and you arrive at that 60%?
Okay, so you need, as I say, you need a reasonably short time, and depending on availability, that's why we are worried when we have to stretch over a long period. But if you're able to get, let's say, a critical mass of people vaccinated within 3 months, then you are likely to get that herd immunity.
All right, so that conversation I had earlier in the morning with my guest when he joined me on the Happy Morning Show. Now I'm back in the studio with Dr. Bediako. He's joining me via Zoom, and Mr. Dazi as well, also joining me via Zoom for us to continue with the conversation. Now, when we are talking about vaccination, a lot of people assume we understand what the word vaccination means. I will start with Dr. Bediako and find out from him what necessarily vaccination means, because we take it for granted that we understand what vaccination means, but from the perspective of the doctors and then from the pharmacists, what necessarily does vaccination mean and what does it do? Dr. Bediako, I'll start with you. Good evening.
Good evening. So vaccination is the use of I guess you could call it a very simple product called a vaccine, to stimulate our immune system to recognize an infectious agent, and in so doing, prepare the immune system to defend the body against that agent if you were to come into contact with it. So a vaccine is a preventative measure. It is not a treatment. So a vaccine protects you from a disease before you are infected. And it works by boosting your natural immunity, your natural defenses, to effectively combat a particular pathogen. So vaccines are specific to a particular disease. So if you, for instance, a measles vaccine protects you from measles, a polio vaccine protects you from polio, and a SARS-CoV-2 or COVID vaccine protects you against COVID.
So if somebody has, for instance, COVID-19 and then receives a vaccine today, the person would have gotten the disease already, so it would not be able to prevent the person from having the disease. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So a COVID vaccine, does not treat you. and it's best administered before you've been exposed. However, with something like COVID-19, because people can become infected again, so we have cases of people getting COVID 2, maybe even 3 times, there is still the utility of vaccinating somebody against it, even if they have recovered from it once. So everybody will be vaccinated, not just necessarily those who have never been exposed. But if you were to receive the vaccine, then presumably, hopefully, it would protect you from future disease, given that in this case, you can get COVID multiple times.
All right, let me go to Mr. Daddy and find out from him the drugs we are going for. So far from what we have gotten from the Health Ministry and then Health Service, what they have told us is that we are going for the AstraZeneca and the Sputnik V. Mr. Daddy, what do we know about these vaccines?
Yeah, thank you very much. So, just to add a little to what Dr. Bediako said, vaccines are biological products, as we all know, and they are taken from the organism that causes the disease. And so it could be a live organism which is attenuated or weakened to reduce its potency as much as possible, or it could be the organism which is killed and used for the vaccine, or fractions of the organism, or it could even be a biotech through laboratory engineering. And so the organism that causes the disease itself is what is used in producing the vaccine. Said that the potency is reduced to the barest minimum so that it may not cause the disease, but it's able to trigger the body to produce antibodies. Said that when the rare organism comes into contact with the body is able to recognize it and then produce the antibodies against it. But to say the 2 vaccines that has been mentioned, the Covishield or the AstraZeneca, in fact, what is coming now, which we are anticipating tomorrow, is the AstraZeneca product produced by the Serum Institute of India, and it's called Covishield. That vaccine is being used in UK. It has been tried in Brazil and other countries. So we know that it is not a completely new vaccine, and it's not Ghana. Ghana is not the first country to use the vaccine. UK, has vaccinated a lot of their population using the vaccine. For Sputnik, apart from Russia, I don't know other countries that have used it, but it's a vaccine that has been given the authorization by the WHO to be used globally for countries that wish to use it. So it is also a very safe vaccine. And my understanding is that it has even been approved by our FDA to be used in the country. So it means that it has been assessed and found to be effective in preventing the COVID disease. So these are 2 vaccines that for now we are anticipating. But what currently we are getting from tomorrow is the AstraZeneca product.
Now, the ability to fight COVID-19 that have popped up, that of South Africa, that from UK and others that are being mentioned, is this that have popped up, that of fight, the disease from the pharmacist's point of view?
Please come again. The question wasn't clear.
Now, I was asking the question that the AstraZeneca that we are taking delivery of from tomorrow, has it got the capacity to fight the new strains of COVID-19 that we are talking about, that of the UK, that of South Africa, and some others?
Of course. Once it is being used in UK, and that is predominantly the vaccine that is being used in UK, so it has the capacity to prevent the disease. And I believe if there had been any problem, UK might have stopped using it, and they are still using it. And so it is good for us as well. Maybe Dr. Bediako will tell you the dominant strain that is in our country. It is not the South African one. the type that we have is not a type, predominantly, it's not the South African type. And so the vaccine is good to prevent the strain that is predominantly circulating in our environment.
Dr. Bediako, let me jump to you. I know when we are talking about these drugs, the key things you look out for as medical professionals is that of efficacy and safety. Now, these two drugs, AstraZeneca and then Sputnik V, we know it's 86% for AstraZeneca, and then it's around 91.6% for Sputnik V. In terms of efficacy and then safety, one would ask the question, why are we going for an 86% efficacy drug as compared to Pfizer and the rest of them? I know the explanation has been given about the storage temperature and the rest of them, but can't the country be able to secure, equipment that would make us get ones that have higher efficacy rates and more safety for its citizenry?
I'd say you use the word drug. Actually, vaccines are not considered drugs. Vaccines are, as Mr. Daddy said, biological products, and drugs are for treatment. So just making that point that we wouldn't really classify vaccines as drugs. But yeah, you make a good point. The efficacy, 86 versus 91 and 9, I think the Pfizer and Moderna ones are somewhere in the low 90s, are, we would say, within margin of error. Anything above, the WHO was basically said, given the pandemic nature of this disease, anything above 50 to 60% was going to be approved. So I don't think there's a huge difference. 86 and 92, I don't think is enough of a difference. As you said, there are other considerations. Moderna vaccine, for instance, is in very short supply. It is unlikely that we would have gotten access to Moderna before next year. Pfizer, perhaps a little bit more in supply, but the issue with Pfizer, as you have mentioned, is the cold chain. There's no point bringing vaccines in when they would go bad because we don't have the capacity to store them. And I think because of the emergency nature and the fact that we need to roll these vaccines out very quickly, we are opting to bring in vaccines that can use our existing infrastructure. There are certainly plans in place, I believe, to try to enhance our cold chain infrastructure. So over the next few weeks to months, hopefully we'll be bringing in equipment that can store some of these ultra cold vaccines, and hopefully those can also be included. But since we need to move immediately, we have to make use of what we have. And the infrastructure we have is best suited to handle vaccines that require anywhere from 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, which is AstraZeneca and Sputnik V. So I think it's also a matter of cost. These vaccines are not always, some are coming to us through COVAX, which is a facility that is providing them to us for free. So the government is not paying for COVAX. COVAX has got AstraZeneca vaccines to distribute. So that is partly why we are also receiving those. But then the AstraZeneca are between $3 to $4 a dose. Sputnik is about $10. And then, Moderna and Pfizer, you're talking over $10. In fact, Moderna can be as high as $30. So per dose, and we need two doses for each individual. So there are a lot of considerations, but I think the main consideration right now is what infrastructure do we currently have to support the vaccination rollout, and that is influencing our focus on AstraZeneca. Finally, in terms of the variants, yes, Mr. Dazi is right that the dominant variant we have currently appears to be the B117, which is the quote-unquote UK variant. That may change, and so we need to keep doing surveillance. The sequencing work we do at WACBIP is very important to continue to identify. If at some point we begin to see an increase in the variant that has been identified in South Africa that appears to be less susceptible to this vaccine, then we may need to ask ourselves whether AstraZeneca is a vaccine to use. But for now, AstraZeneca vaccine is good enough for use in Ghana.
Now, help me understand this, because this morning when I was speaking to the FDA, I asked a question as to what went into the process of approving these two drugs. And the question I sought to ask was, Is it that specimen of the vaccine had been brought into the country for the FDA to ascertain, you know, its counter effects and then its ability to cure? Or was it that it was as a result of data which they have gotten from the manufacturing companies themselves? Now, they told me that it's the data they got for the manufacturing companies themselves that they are using as the basis for which they are approving these drugs. Now, is that the best route for us as a country?
Well, I believe that it's not just data, actually. Ghana FDA is not just depending on data from the manufacturer. I believe they're also depending on data from other regulatory authorities who have evaluated these vaccines. So because we are not the first to roll out these vaccines, we have the benefit of reviewing the information that, for instance, the United Kingdom or the US have used to initially regulate some or approve some of these vaccines, in addition to whatever clinical trials have been done by both by the manufacturer, also by external bodies. So we are limited, you know, in Ghana, we have limited capacity. We don't produce vaccines, and we currently don't necessarily have the infrastructure to even do some of the tests in terms of looking at, you know, whether the vaccines are, you know, for instance, the variants, different variants, how they respond. We are sort of at the mercy, or at least we are dependent on data generated elsewhere. So I believe that Ghana FDA is reviewing data from a number of sources to make the decision. For vaccines that have been approved by the WHO, approved by the United Kingdom, I think that approach is fine. With Sputnik V, there is data suggesting that it is efficacious, but it's a Russian vaccine, and it has been tested largely in Russia. So there's a little less information. I still believe that there is sufficient information to make an initial preliminary sort of decision, but we need to continue to scrutinize it in terms of seeing what other data comes out, because this is it's an evolving situation. So with a vaccine like AstraZeneca, it was tested all over the world, including in South Africa, which is why they discovered that, oh, the variant here does not really work as well. We would need to, since we are bringing in Sputnik, and it's being used in a number of other countries, it's not just used in Russia, but there is certainly less data available for Sputnik than there is for AstraZeneca. So as a scientist, I would be a little bit, I would be hoping that our FDA is continuing to probe and ask for even more information. As Sputnik is rolled out in other places, we assess whether it is as effective against different variants, and is it going to be effective in Ghana?
Do you have a reason to be concerned when it comes to the Sputnik V, considering that it is not necessarily the World Health Organization in terms of its application across the world?
Well, the World Health Organization has so far only approved a couple of vaccines, but that also depends on whether you submit yourself for evaluation. So I believe that Sputnik V has been submitted to the WHO. I'm not entirely sure if they have done it yet. I know that they have submitted it to the European regulatory authority, and they are yet to receive a full validation there. Sputnik, I believe, is currently in use in about 30 countries. But it is true that, you know, AstraZeneca has now been approved by the WHO. So that gives you a certain level of confidence in it that currently Sputnik V does not yet have. I'm not saying that Sputnik V is not a good vaccine. The data that is available suggests that it is 92% efficacious, but it does not carry the WHO seal of approval yet. There are vaccines being used in the US. Moderna, for instance, does not have WHO seal of approval, and yet the US is using it. So just because it doesn't have WHO seal of approval does not mean it's bad, but certainly it is an extra level of assurance, perhaps. And so the hope, I would hope that the manufacturers and the Russian government would submit it to the WHO, because then it would make countries like Ghana, who do not necessarily have the capacity to do our own initial research, can have an extra layer of confidence. But certainly for AstraZeneca, it has been approved in Europe, in the US by the WHO. It's been approved in South Africa. So there's a huge, as a scientist, I have a huge level of confidence. The Sputnik, we know a little bit less about. And so I would say if I had, you know, my confidence is slightly lower, but I still believe that it's an effective vaccine.
Now, let me speak to Mr. Dazi and then put a point that Doctor about capacity as a nation, our ability to, procure more of these. I was thinking that the local pharmaceutical companies, by this time, per the meeting which you had with His Excellency the President somewhere last year, where there were indications that your capacity was going to be boosted, we would be able to produce these drugs locally. Mr. Dadzie, where are we in terms of our capacity as local pharmaceutical companies to manufacture, some of these drugs if we have the patent?
Yeah, thank you. Vaccine production is quite a complex. It involves a lot of complexities. So, in as much that we have capacity to medicine, of course, for a long way to go. The infrastructure and the cost, the investment involved is quite huge. We need to also build a capacity, technology transfer.
All right, it looks like we're having a little challenge with Mr. Dadzie's line. Dr. Bediako, and then try to find out a few more things. Doc, if you could kindly check your connection for us, Mr. Dadzie, I would very much appreciate it. But let me go to Dr. Bediako and then ask him a very important question about herd immunity, where we are told that we should have almost about 60% of the population being vaccinated for us to achieve herd immunity. Doc, with only 2.4 million of these vaccines coming in the first quarter of the year, is that achievable?
Well, I mean, we have a window. It's not, we have probably about, I would say probably around 8 months. I believe the plan is March to October. We have that window to try to vaccinate as many people as we can and try to hit that 20 million threshold. That is the target that has been set. Yes, we are getting the first quarter. I suspect we might get more than, depending on, we know what COVAX is bringing in. And it's up to our government to be able to secure more vaccines from other sources, which is why we are bringing in vaccines like Sputnik V. We have to supplement, we basically try to get vaccines from where we can within this window to try to vaccinate as close to the 60%, if not higher. I mean, in my opinion, the herd immunity threshold is actually higher than 60%, it's closer to 70%. So we need to try to vaccinate as many people as we can within that time. And the real limiting factor is going to be supply of vaccines. We are at the mercy of global supply and demand. And this is a vaccine that everybody is trying to get their hands on. Countries much richer than ours who are willing to pay. My understanding is Israel paid as much as $40 per dose. And that is why they've so far been able to vaccinate, almost about 50% of their population. They were willing and they had the resources to pay for it. And so they went to the front of the line. We are largely depending on the philanthropy and the goodwill of other countries. And so that is the challenge. That is the challenge we have. But I know our government.
Just a quick one, Doc. If we're not able to reach the threshold for the herd immunity, around the 60%, what happens to the population? Let's say we get 2.4 million for the first quarter. The next 3 months, we're not able to secure much. Maybe we get like 300 more to be added to it. We are nowhere close to the 60%. What happens to the population when we have just a few having been vaccinated?
Well, the problem is then COVID is not eliminated. And as I said, the vaccine efficacy is thought to be about maybe 12 to 18 months. So you begin to reach a point where even those you vaccinated are beginning to lose their immunity, and now you're right back where you started. So that is the danger. The danger is if we don't vaccinate enough people, then all of this potentially is for nothing, because we would then have to revaccinate everybody all over again. So we have to get this right the first time. I don't think we can afford to get it wrong, because otherwise it would be a huge waste of resources.
You raised a very important point about immunity. How long does an injection, if you get the double dose, how long does it last? Is it forever? Is it for a year? Is it for 2 years? How long per the pieces of information that you might have gathered as scientists?
So currently, the assumption that we are still trying to figure it out because these vaccines are new, right? So we don't have a lot of data in terms of how long the protection lasts. But currently, estimates are around between 12 to 18 months. So that is about a year. I think it's safe to say around a year is as long as the protection will last. So if we are still vaccinating people a year from now, before hitting our herd immunity threshold, then we have a problem because the people we vaccinated now will no longer be protected and potentially could get reinfected and sick. So that's why we have, that's why the target is to try to vaccinate people between now and the end of this year. If we can hit that 20 million people, then enough people will be vaccinated that would probably break transmission and we wouldn't have anything to worry about. So even when people's immunity wanes, there'll be no virus left to infect them.
All right, let me try Mr. Dazi's line for a second time to see if I can establish contact with him and ask the question about capacity and our ability to produce. Because one would have expected, since last year, we had the information that these big pharmaceutical companies were making the effort and the strides to get a vaccine. So one would have expected that we would have been following that course in terms of securing financial capacity to also produce if we have the patents to do so. Mr. Dazi, if you can hear me, in that respect, what steps have we taken?
Yeah, so I must say, like I was the statement I made initially, that vaccine production involves huge investment. And
all right, it looks like Mr. Dazi's line is giving us a bit of a problem. What we'll do is to just go for a short breather. And when we come back, I'll still pose the local capacity and our ability to get the patent to manufacture these in our country. But there are several other concerns we'll be talking about when we are back from this commercial break. If you just join us, you're welcome. This is Fact Sheet live on eTV. We'll be right back. As we're live on eTV, live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is eTVGhana, and would like to hear from you. I've been having a conversation with Dr. Bediako and Mr. Dati, and we've been talking about COVID-19, what we know so far, the vaccines that are being brought into the country. Tomorrow, we are taking delivery of the first consignment of COVID-19 vaccines. Tomorrow, I believe, we'll get a lot more information as to the number we are receiving. If viewers can recollect, initially, we were told 2.4 million, vaccines. Then later on, we read in the papers that it was around 350,000 or so. Would it suffice? But let me go back and try and make contact with Mr. Dati and ask him about the local content bit, whether they have the capacity. If they don't have the capacity, they did not prepare enough, to secure some funding, either with the support from the government or from the banking sector, to ensure we are not where we are. But it looks like I'm still having a challenge with Mr. Dati's line. So let me go to Dr. Bediako and ask a question which has been bothering me for some time. Now, Doc, world over, there are concerns about how antibacterials may not work again, considering that a lot of the bacteria, the fungi, and the rest of them are growing immune to some of these antibacterials that we take. So I'm asking myself, if we have less than 1 million of these vaccines being introduced into the bodies of people, and then they mingle with people, and the vaccine grows a little bit stronger, and then a new strain is gotten. Is there a possibility that somebody takes the drug, maybe the first shot, isn't able to get a second shot, then a new strain evolves out of that? Is that a possibility?
Yes, vaccines typically, because the way vaccines work, they stimulate the immune system, you don't typically have the same issue that you have with antibiotics. Antibiotics are drugs that kill bacteria, and they tend, if you don't use them properly, to drive resistance. Vaccines are a little bit different, but we could have an issue if we underdose people, where not so much that we may enhance the emergence of new variants that may not be able to be covered by the vaccine. So certainly it is an issue. If we don't vaccinate enough people, like I said before, we set up the issue where we don't get herd immunity, and so we don't control transmission. And so the virus sticks around. And as long as the virus is staying around, the longer it stays around, the more it's going to mutate. And eventually, whatever vaccine you developed will eventually no longer be efficacious, because the virus will continue to mutate away. And we may need new vaccines, or we may need to modify vaccines. Already, the vaccine makers are beginning to try to come up with boosters that potentially would take care of some of the issues that they are already identifying. But that would mean we're constantly having to bring in new vaccines. So yeah, it is very important, especially with the 2-dose regimen, that if people are required to get the 2 doses, that we make sure that they do get the 2 doses. And so that sets up logistical challenges as well. You know, if you bring people in once, you tell them to come back in 4 weeks or in 5 weeks, you have to make sure that they try to come back. So the challenge ahead of us is a great one. There's no doubt about that. But I believe that, you know, we have a plan in place that, if executed properly, will achieve the desired results. But execution is going to involve many different factors. Execution is going to involve our health workers, Ghana Health Service, actually following through with their plan and implementing it properly. It's going to require that we have access to enough vaccines, because a great plan but with no vaccines still achieves nothing. So we need to make sure that we can get access to those vaccines. But then finally, probably even most importantly, citizenry in this country have to agree to get vaccinated. And so we have to communicate clearly the importance of this vaccination, the fact that these vaccines are safe and efficacious. Because if the public do not avail themselves, if the public are hesitant, then all the best laid plans will be for naught. So it's very, very critical that we get all these components of the program right. But I believe that it is within our power to do so, and by the grace of God, that will happen.
We are taking delivery of vaccines tomorrow, God willing. Do you get the sense we are ready in terms of the points you raise about the people knowing, the people's willingness, with all the conspiracy theories on social media?
To be honest, that is what concerns me. I think we focused a lot on the logistical planning. And I think you have to give Ghana Health Service and the government some credit there, that they have really tried to come up with a plan. I think a lot of effort has gone into trying to source the vaccines, and that is difficult because there's not a lot of supply, and we don't have the resources to put ourselves at the front of the line. But where I think we are falling short is the communication. I work at the university, and I have students, and I've polled my own students, and I'm appalled and shocked at the level of hesitancy that I see. And these are educated young people who typically should be very enthusiastic about something like this. And yet there is a great amount of hesitancy among even the educated classes of this country. So I think that is potentially the biggest threat, is that, you know, I've seen a study that polled Ghanaians and found that only 40% said they would readily, happily accept the vaccine. That is problematic, because we already don't have enough vaccine yet. And if only 40% of people approached want to take it, then how are we going to hit our herd immunity threshold? So I think we need to think very carefully about how we message, how we communicate. It's why I agree to do shows like yours, because we need to get the message out. But it cannot just be the voice of a scientist. We need to find ways to get into the communities, to have the community influencers buy in. We need churches, religious leaders to buy in. And we need to fight as hard as we can against all these conspiracy theories and misinformation. Because we are going to need people to sign up. We're going to need people to cooperate. And currently, I think we're a little bit behind.
Let me try the line of Mr. Dazi one more time and see if we can establish connection before we round up our conversation. Mr. Dazi, are you able to hear me, sir?
Yeah, I'm able to hear you.
All right, so quickly,
I can hear you.
Quickly, wrapping up. I would want to find out. Was it that our pharmaceutical companies did not prepare enough in trying to secure funding to position yourself to locally manufacture these if you have the patents?
Yeah, so like I was saying, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Am I audible? Very good, very good. So I was saying that, yes, the pharmaceutical sector in Ghana is far well advanced in terms of production of medicines. But when it comes to vaccines, of course, it's a specialized area which needs a lot of investment. Setting up technology and the equipment are all very high cost areas. And so even though preparations have started, we still have some time really to put all this infrastructure in place to be able to go into vaccine manufacturing, because it's quite heavy investment. So preparations are on the way. We need the support of the banks, of the government, and the countries, bilateral.
Let me pause you for a second, sir, Mr. Daji. You just said that you need the support of the banks and the government, but have you made the effort to, approach these institutions to get that support?
Definitely. We have the Pharmaceutical Association, who has made several contacts, and the Chamber of Pharmacy, which involves a lot of the pharmaceutical industries, the production industries. They have made a lot of inroads. I must say that the grants have been prepared, and I must say that grants have been prepared for the pharmaceutical industry in Ghana to take off in the area of vaccine production. But I must say that we still have a long way to go from now, because the investment in vaccine production is quite huge.
Is it that the banks are not ready to give you loans or support? What is the problem?
No, what I'm saying is that the investment that should go into it is quite huge. And therefore, we need support of everybody, including the government itself, including the investment banks, including technology transfer from the companies that are well established, especially South-South Corporation, Indian companies, and they are willing to come over in terms of technology transfer. And very soon we shall see them coming over to partner with our local industries to start the production of vaccines. And it will be a fresh future for us to have our own local company manufacturing vaccines. That will be a cost saving for us as a country, because all the vaccines that we are using in the country, we have to import them.
Tomorrow, we are taking delivery of our first consignment of vaccines. What role are you playing in there to ensure that the process is smooth as pharmaceutical companies or association?
Well, so I work with the Ghana Health Service and with the immunization program specifically. And of course, all the logistical issues, getting the vaccines in country, was done by the EPI program. I lead in the process. And so we shall be there to receive the vaccines. But when it comes to the role of the pharmacists, in terms of the deployment of the vaccine, of course, they have been identified, the pharmacists have been identified as a critical partner when it comes to vaccine deployment, because it's easily accessible to the general populace. The first point of call for anybody who is ill is to go to the pharmacy. And so we have identified them as a critical vaccination point. They will be involved, those that have areas in front of the pharmacies, vaccination posts will be cited for people to go in there and access the vaccination. And so they have not been left out. The pharmacies have not been left out in this vaccine deployment. Of course, when it comes to information, people move into pharmacies and a request of information on their vaccines and on their medicines. And so we've identified them also as a key partner when it comes to the dissemination of information for this campaign. And so during the training for communication specialists, training of communicators, pharmacists will also be involved and be trained so that they will be able to provide information to the general populace that may come to their end there. And so they are part of the deployment strategy, using them as very critical human resource components to ensure that vaccination sites are available and accessible, and also to make sure preparing them to be able to disseminate the information that we need to pass across the general population. And that is how we are positioning them to play that role for us to be
Right.
to ensure that we are successful in the vaccine deployment strategy.
Mr. Dazi, I thank you for your input. Let me take wrap-up comments from Dr. Bediako. Doc, just your final comment.
My comments are, this is an important time for Ghana. This is a really, this is an unprecedented event. And it's of the utmost importance that as the government works hard to bring in vaccines, that, the general public avail themselves to be vaccinated. I cannot state it more strongly that this is a really important event. COVID-19 presents significant challenges for this country, both economic and health. And the vaccine is really the only way out. And so we must do everything we can. Look for more information if you must, but I believe that we must avail ourselves to be vaccinated. And I hope that a large majority of people will heed that call.
Doc, I'm grateful you made time to join me tonight on the fact sheet. And tonight I've been talking to Dr. Bediako and Mr. John Frederick Dazi, and they've been sharing their thoughts with us concerning the fight against COVID-19 and Ghana's effort at securing vaccines to combat the disease. Tomorrow, God willing, we take delivery of our first consignment of COVID-19 vaccines. On that note, I'd like to thank all of you for being a part of tonight's edition of Fact Sheet